Hello, welcome to JadeCon Gaming. My name is Adam, and today I have been blessed with the opportunity to interview game designer Bryan C.P. Steele about an upcoming science fiction role-playing game he's been working on. But first, a couple questions to get to know who you are within the gaming industry. How did you get into game design in the first place?
Oh, wow. Well, I've been a dork my whole life. I've always just been, ever since I was little, I always into gaming of various, kinds and varieties. And way back in the early 2000s, I was working a bunch of dead-end jobs and decided that my wife decided that we needed to do something that wasn't going to crush my soul on a daily basis. So we looked at buying into a local comic book shop. And during that whole process of trying to get the business loans and getting them squared away, the owner's son, who was a friend of mine, he was one of my local D&D friends, had said, well, if you're going to do this, you need to see the other side of things. And he took me up to one of the trade shows up at Alliance, just a couple hours away from us. And at the Alliance open house, you get, as retailers, I walked in and was just like, oh my gosh, all this stuff that we don't normally get to see, from a gamer's perspective. And I sat down and had a chance to play a really fun little miniatures game that they were going to put out in the market the next year. They wanted to show the stores, get people all psyched for it. Played a bunch of games with a bunch of these cool steampunk robot looking things. Spent most of the night playing with a couple of guys, and at the end of the night, I gave him my my perforated edge Avery card that said, "Go to my MySpace and read some of my magazine article fan fiction." Basically, I was just kind of surfing for free stuff. One of those, I'll do demos for you. Anything that you need, just let me know. And I didn't think anything of it. It was just a kind of one and done. Went back to real life. And about a month later, a gentleman by the name of Matt Wilson reached out to me and said, "Can you do a test piece for us?" Says here you've done some writing. So I did a test piece. They liked it. We had to do a little bit of back and forth. And he goes, "Do you think you can do 70,000 words by August?" And at that point in my career, I had never even seen what that had looked like. I had no career. I mean, I had done some magazine articles tops, and that ended up being War Machine Prime. We won 3 Origins Awards the following year for it, and I never looked back. I was like, this is what I want to do. And then just over the years, I've gone through different publishers and chunks of freelance, chunks of full-time, chunks of both, depending on the situation. But I absolutely love it. I call on my own YouTube show, I call myself the professional nerd, and that's what I do. I nerd professionally.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. I have perhaps probably later additions than that, but I have one of my friends that I play D&D with is always for do the Iron Kingdoms, do the the things related to War Machines. So.
So, and right behind my head, so right here, this little picture, that is the original art for Reinhold. So that character, funny inside story, that character in my original piece, I invented that character. So in the original piece that I submitted to, or I was going to submit to Matt, I actually killed him. I killed him off as kind of this like ennui, edgy moment. And my wife, who did the editing, goes, "Why'd you kill the little goblin guy? He was too cool." And I was like, well, because, it's got, ennui. and she's like, you should totally have him live. You should have him duck at the last minute or something. So I changed the ending. And Matt loved him so much that he made the art for him and made him part of the game almost immediately. So I owe this little goblin probably, the last 2 decades of my life.
There you go. And of course, you've done a lot since then. What are some of the more popular games that people might already have on their shelves currently?
If anybody has been, especially Sci-Fi fans, the Babylon 5 role-playing game from Mongoose Publishing, I did a lot of work with that in the early 2000s. Miniature game players, obviously War Machine. I ran the Dark Age skirmish game from Coleman or Not, eventually becoming CMON. for many years, but most recently, I would think that I was on the lead design team for the Essence 20 system for Renegade. So GI Joe, Transformers, Power Rangers, and My Little Pony. Oddly enough, but that was a ton of fun, and I still think some of those books were probably my favorite things that I ever put words into. Because it was literally like just kind of going back to my Saturday morning childhood, and playing in the toolbox or in the toy box to create our toolbox. It was a great time, and I think that's probably in most recent things, that's probably the most notable things that people might find on their shelves and go, oh yeah, I've seen that guy's name.
Yep. I've those are ones that I've known on the last free RPG day up at the friendly local gaming store. There was a guy that was just gushing about that there talking to me.
Awesome.
So yeah, he was big into the Power Ranger side of things and a whole setup. But you definitely made his day.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What was funny is I originally signed on to that project to do the Transformers stuff. That's why Elisa grabbed me, because I'm a massive Transformers nerd. And we got into the big meeting that gathered the team together and said, okay, this is what we're going to work on. And we started splitting up into our sub teams, and Elisa let me know, oh, and you're doing the Power Rangers team. And at that point, I was aware of Power Rangers. Like I'd watched some with my kid a little bit here and there, but I definitely was not what you would call like a fan. And I was like, has there been some kind of mistake? Like, am I doing the wrong thing? It turned out because Hasbro has particular like an order of operations. We had to have certain things done first. Power Rangers was one of the first ones that had to be out the door, because so many other things were going to build off of kind of the core mechanics that we built in Power Rangers. And because of my design background, Elisa was like, I need you on that team to help me get this actual Essence 20 thing up to work. And then I became a fan in like 6 months. I binged multiple seasons. It was actually the comics that got me into the Power Rangers world more than the shows did. I dove in head first, and I still collect them. I haven't worked for Renegade for almost a year as far as like freelance gigs and stuff, and I'm still getting my subscription, and they turned me into a fan.
Awesome. Now, moving to today's topic of discussion, I understand you're the producer and lead designer on the upcoming Intergalactic Heroes.
So when it comes to our sci-fi games, I'm kind of the first guy in the door. But everything that we're doing is built. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Siegfried and Chris Goober Ramsley, if the two of them, the lead designers for the actual Everyday Heroes main system, a lot of those bones are absolutely there. There's no question. We designed this. We wanted it to be something that they can play nice together. And in order to do that, you got to be able to kind of build off of the system that already works, that's already there, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and then force the former thing to play nice with you. You kind of do the other direction. So while I would consider myself the lead on the project, definitely it is an absolute, it's a team effort when it comes to the actual design. And a lot of the other names that are involved in that book, we actually originally had signed on when we were doing the Rebel Moon role-playing game. So there are still several people on that team that did work for the different project that we kept some of those rules after the project was canceled. Because it was good work. And there's just no reason to let that go to waste.
No, I'd remembered with the whole drama with Rebel Moon, I'd originally seen the announcement and was excited for, this new show, and the game got canceled. I never ended up watching the show. I'm still looking forward to the game. So
it was actually, I'm a massive Zack Snyder fan, and it was one of the things that brought me to the company. Part of my interview process with Dave was, he's like, so this project, signed my NDAs, and I was like, I'm all in, whatever you need me to do. And it was an absolute pleasure to get to work with Zach and Netflix for those couple of months. But it was definitely a tragedy for me personally. Like, I was like, oh, it was such a bummer. But at the end of the day, they got their story, we got our rules, and everybody still gets to play nice. And as far as I'm concerned, it actually gave us a little more freedom because we were able to then create our own, for the first time, honestly, outside of our organized play system. This is the first time we got to create kind of our own storyline, our own IP that wasn't just an individual. We've done a bunch of the cinematic adventure books for Everyday Heroes, which is set in various, movie worlds, movie universes, and that's awesome. But this is the first time that we get to build a foundation for ourselves, like create our own backdrop, create our own narrative, create our own aliens, and not. It isn't just a. Oh, if you look, that's an Ewok, or if you look, I can tell that's actually a Cyberman. That's awesome and that's cool for people who want to do that at their table. But as a creative who's been writing, novels and games for 20 plus years, I always seen in my personal experience, I feel like the work excels if I have more of a stake in it. So kind of when it stopped being about making the Rebel Moon story and started being about, okay, let's make this rule set. We had a meeting right off, pretty much out of the gate, that was like, all right, this is what I want to do. I hope it's okay. I'd like to make our world, like if that's cool. And Dave completely signed on. He loved the idea. And that's where, how the Throne World Saga section of the book became a thing. So I'm excited. I'm super psyched.
Wonderful. And from a broad view, though, what is Intergalactic Heroes?
Intergalactic Heroes, in and of itself, is a toolbox sci-fi role-playing game that is based heavily on the Everyday Heroes core engine, allowing you to create your own sci-fi role-playing kind of backdrop and narrative. That if you want, let's say that you want to maybe play a Star Wars-esque game, but you don't like the current system that someone's using, or there hasn't been an Andromeda role-playing game. And you're like, man, I really love that series. I want to bring that to my tabletop. We're hoping that Intergalactic Heroes will give you enough of a tool base, enough of a variety of different options that you'll be able to kind of build that yourself. Or if you are feeling like I don't want to take the cellophane off and just immediately jump in, we've got the Throne World Saga built into it. And then we're already starting to talk to some of the Hollywood companies, some of the production companies about attaching licenses, kind of like we did with like Rambo and Universal Soldier and stuff to Everyday Heroes. Do some of the harder sci-fi future lines, the stuff that would have never worked with Everyday Heroes, and then bring in some new rules and some new classes and some new origins that will let you play those specifically in an official level. So yeah.
That is so exciting for me to hear. That's one of the things I was going to get into. I was like, I'm hoping that they doing that with this. Exciting.
That's the goal. That is absolutely the goal. Yeah.
Obviously, licenses pending, but yeah, I wish you evil geniuses the best of luck with that. I will reap the benefits. And there are, of course, currently several sci-fi RPGs already on the market: Starfinder, Shadowrun, all sorts of Star Wars and Star Trek licensed games.
Yeah.
What sets Intergalactic Heroes apart?
I think that for me personally, what I would say that sets IGH away from some of the other licenses, something like Starfinder, really does feel a little bit like D&D in space, which is again not a bad thing. Spelljammer is one of my favorite D&D worlds of all time. It has its place, but it is a little harder to run sometimes a crunchier sci-fi if you've got more fantasy, kind of intermixed into it. Just like it's really hard to run a gritty traveler game using like a D&D style mechanic. We're hoping that we can kind of try and bridge that gap to find that sort of happy place that you can use enough of one part, or if this class doesn't work for you, if you're like, no, we don't want any space wizards, then just say, hey, do not use the Harmonist, don't use the rules for the Tyde, that's set aside. And our Game Master's Guide, the second book in the series, is going to really highlight how that works. In fact, actually, at a recent convention, one of my favorite conventions, Gamehole Con up in Madison, I actually had to sit down with several writers because while I love to write these books, I also know my limitations. And I wanted to get a bunch of different voices for multiple reasons into that Game Master's Guide. And so I actually have talked to 5 other writers to do adventures, like little one-shot adventures that highlights the versatility of the system. So that way there's going to be one that's based on space horror, one that is a space sandbox, and then it highlights which rules should and should not be focused on to do an adventure of this type. So that way we're looking for versatility. And for fans that are already familiar with Everyday Heroes and the style of kind of cinematic over simulation, we're hoping to kind of stay with that. But then there will also be that stuff that anything that we put out for our systems can work just fine. You might have to do a little massaging to make the starvation rules in Military Heroes work in an Intergalactic Heroes setting, but those base bones would still be there and they would still work. And so that's kind of what we're hoping for. We're hoping for a collective toy box, and that if someone's really feeling, like they want to, break the seams on their collection, they could just look at someone and say, "All right, make anything, and we'll see where it goes." I know I have a couple of convention games planned, where people will sit down at the table and go, "I think you said this is a sci-fi game," and they're going to be playing like the rugby player, the baseball guy, and they're going to be like, "What's this all about?" And they're going to be a bunch of abductees from Earth, Everyday Heroes characters playing suddenly in space. So we'll see, but I think that's probably, if there's anything that sets it off to the side, is that it's got actual versatility.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least we're hoping so. Obviously, it's not out yet, so I don't want to automatically assume that we've succeeded. But I would hope
you got goals.
Yeah, but the goals is that it's got enough versatility that people can either play in any of our sandboxes that we've created, any of the licenses that we've gathered and created product for, but also can go ahead and kind of come up with their own cool homebrews and maybe make a facsimile of their favorite licenses that are already out there.
Okay. And so I think you've mostly answered, but so it is completely standalone. You don't need the Everyday Heroes book to play it.
Correct.
But say if you want to be a billionaire from the vault, it should still work when you're playing it to pull content that already exists and expand it from the start.
Yeah, the only thing that's going to be highly, like the only thing that would be completely different that like someone would go, but that skill doesn't exist, is like actual starship piloting. But that's because in Everyday Heroes, we have no reason to have capital starship piloting as a skill. It doesn't mean that an Everyday Heroes character who was transplanted into IGH couldn't learn it. We've got those minor feats that let you pick up individual skill proficiencies for a reason. So let's say that you were playing I can't say Flash Gordon. If you were doing Shiny Steve, the rugby player that got taken up into space, the first time he gains a level, he could take a minor feat to learn how to pilot a starship because now he's in that area, and the system itself would function just fine.
Wonderful. Getting into some of like the gritty of what's included in there, I'm sure you got alien species to play as. What I've looked through a little bit of the document, and these are creative. You have a mollusk.
So we when we were looking at the alien origins, the thing that got us is I didn't want, because initially before we decided we were going to kind of backbone it on the Throne World saga and create our own IP. If you look at like Everyday Heroes, everybody's human, unless you like have a mutant from Universal or Total Recall or something. And but at a base, everything that's there is a realistic thing. And so we were looking at the alien origins, and there was 2 ways to do it. There was either create clandestine aliens, specific in the case of the turblids, the mollusk, we create our own species, but then we've got to give them some history. We've got to give them a home world. We've got to give them story, which means we have to give them narrative. And we have to give them narrative. We've got to put that narrative in some kind of box. You can't just say, here we go, unless you're going to go completely the opposite direction. And then you have like bug origin, furry origin, slimy origin. And it just felt like it would be too generic, too easily kind of hand waved away as something silly. And so that was where we kind of started thinking about, I was like, well, if we build this into a narrative, we can kind of come up with some really cool races or some really cool species. Like the acrididans are effectively like locusts, but they are herbivores. So you have a bug people that an insectoid race that is not bloodthirsty, a hive-minded swarm of, no, they're just people that like to go to planets and eat the shrubbery that they find there. You mentioned the mollusks. The turblids are they are humanoid mollusks, so they're like basically humanoid slugs that can sense things on a vibration scale, almost like echolocation, but to the point where they can kind of feel the timbre in your voice, and it makes them unbelievably good negotiators or smugglers or people that are designed to hear lies. We kind of created like snails with the weirding way from Dune, effectively. Then we had to make sure that we added in robots. You got to have synthetic people. But one thing that Dave, the evil genius in charge of everything, had been very firm on from the very beginning is that he did not want us to create the kind of mass-produced battle droids. We don't want the Roger Rogers out there. I mean, we can have them. They're part of the universe. But when it came to like a player character, every player character should feel unique, should feel like the hero at the table. Like that's been our brand from the very beginning. So the crofted are individual, unique synthetic life forms. You treat them like any other character. Obviously, they have special rules because they're synthetic and they don't breathe and they need to get repaired instead of healed, and all of that sort of thing. But they're designed for a specific purpose. Whoever their creator was, their own personal workshop god who put them together for a particular reason, and a lot of their own kind of spirit and soul sort of go into this creation. And over the thousands of years that crofted have been around, they've become it's not looked down on to be synthetic. It's not like, oh, you're not real. They're absolutely real. They are absolutely people. They're just not organic. And we're hoping if the artist picks up on a bunch of the cool art orders, we want the crofted to not all just look like 2 arms, 2 legs. I look like a person. There will be some that have like cool spidery legs. There will be some that might have multiple arms. It won't change necessarily their rules, except for maybe that's the reason why they've got expertise in sleight of hand, because they've got multiple tiny arms, or maybe their athletics and acrobatic skills are their benefits for their bonuses for being built that way, because their legs, they've got 2 sets of legs that go opposite directions, like a He-Man villain. Like we can build that however we want. We're hoping the artists will really pick up and run with that.
And of course, there's a limit to how many species you can include in the book. Are there plans to further expand that, or to give game masters guides to making their own?
Absolutely. So definitely on the first. The Game Master's Guide to Building Your Own is a little harder. Coming up with origins for Everyday Heroes and Intergalactic Heroes and eventually Everyday Arcana it's a little part art versus science, because there's a lot of playtesting that goes in to make sure that they fit, to make sure the points work out. And the hardest part that we have is the little bonuses that they get, because sometimes they're completely thematic and not very gameplay heavy. Like the acrididans, as long as there are They have a sufficient amount of vegetation. They only actually have to eat like one day out of the week because they sit there and regurgitate and chew their cud effectively. That's a cool thing for the species, and it could be cool in a particular instance, but it's probably not going to be a huge thing at most game tables. It's just going to be kind of a cool point of order. How do you codify that? Is that worth one attribute point? Is that worth, where does that fall? So you end up kind of creating the collective and giving it a try and see how they turn out and see how they come together. That being said, the Game Master's Guide is going to have, we only have room for like 9 origins in the Player's Guide, the first book, the core book that comes out. The Game Master's Guide is going to have probably 6 or 7 more tucked away inside the bestiary because the intergalactic data files. Sorry, that section basically where we've got all of our extra species. There's a handful of them that we knew that we wanted to be player character capable, but there just wasn't enough room to put them all in the first book. So instead, we've added a handful of them in the bestiary in that section. So that way you've got an NPC stats, you've got if I want to have the Solvasti pirates show up, I've got stats for one, but man, I really dig the Solvasti. They sound cool. They're like lion, like lion raider space dudes that are I love that. Like lion orcs. That's great. I want to be one of those. So there'll be a section underneath the ones that we think are particularly attractive as player characters that will have here's the origin section in here. You're probably not going to see a lot of like special feats or anything like that built off of them, but we want to at least give people the ability to build one if they want.
All right. And you mentioned there with the creating it, the attribute points. For people that haven't looked in the expanded books, Everyday Heroes gave a very interesting way of doing origins that I haven't seen in any other 5e based rule set. Do you want to just briefly say what that is?
So the biggest thing that we've done with Origins is you have so D&D and most role-playing games have I won't say have moved away from random rolling, but it's not, most games are no longer, that's not the only way you can do it. There's almost always some kind of mathematic code as well, whether it's a set number like a standard array, or if it's maybe a point buy system that'll be like, this is how much each thing costs. You've got this many points to spend. And what we were figuring is what we wanted to do, rather than being like, okay, the accreditants are +2 to Constitution and +1, rather than doing that kind of blanket, is we give them a different standard array. And sometimes that means that they might have a slightly couple of stats that are normally higher, but the numbers are going to work out that the human standard array will have probably a few more that are in that middle zone, and maybe for instance, I mentioned the Crofted, they're built specialized. They're one of the only origins that have a starting 16 because they're designed for a particular thing. If I'm built for be a labor Crofted, I probably have as much strength as I can pack onto that chassis. And so, but they also more than likely have cut corners in other places. So they're also one of the only origins that have like 2 8s, because that's not their strengths. That's not what they were built for. And then obviously through backgrounds and professions and things, you can, move that stuff around. But we wanted to make it so they feel a little more unique. And also the more cool special powers, trademarked, that you get from an Origins, you probably get a few fewer points to build the main character, because we're trying to make that we want to try and make it as fair as possible across the table. Even though it's a team-based game, you never want somebody to feel left out, like, I can never do anything, but you've got dark vision, we wanted to try and make it as fair as possible. And the initial Origins that I think the first book that had Origins in it was Total Recall, because it had mutants. It had the first 3 mutants, and that was the first time that we really got to play with having dramatically altered stats from a basic human in order to give them powers.
Interesting concept, because the original game was based on all humans, so it's like, how did they do? I was impressed. Yeah. But and then again, going back to, this has the foundation of Everyday Heroes, so we know it's going to have fun and action-filled combat. How have you done things to make it where we can have the same for space combat.
Ooh, I'm actually really glad that you brought that up. So one of the things that I have always, again, big nerd, huge nerd, professional nerd. I love the concept of in a space battle, unless it's like a dogfight battle where it's like two ships just, but those larger crew-based shots. When you look at a scene in Star Trek, shields up, red alert, and you get a scene of like 3 people on the bridge and maybe somebody down in engineering, and then maybe it'll cut away to somebody out in one of the fighter craft. Not so much in Star Trek, but it's everybody's doing something. And in previous games, I've been a gamer forever, and I've played lots of sci-fi games where it ends up being almost all or nothing. The guy in the person in the cockpit makes all the rolls. I guess you can get on a turret. Okay, once per round, you're going to shoot a guy. And it always just felt, if you weren't one of the starship guys, you were left out. You were at the mercy of the other players, and vice versa was true. If you built a starship guy, then when you're on the away team, they're like, "What are you doing?" I guess I'm going to hang out on the ship. I'll bring them closer to the turret. It never works. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was, rather than creating a combat system that was, okay, what attack are you doing? What level? What initiative are you at? Nothing like that. I wanted to create it more like you are playing as individual scenes that go through. And we created the Starship event system. Starship encounters are made up of Starship events. And Starship events are things like red alert or attack pattern or launch auxiliary craft. If you've got that one dude who's like, I am the fighter pilot, but we were just ambushed and I am nowhere near my ship. The last thing I want to do is be like, all right, well, in 6 turns, you get into your ship and the thing's going to be over by then. So we've created these Starship events that allow you to kind of narratively describe what everybody on the crew, including things like AI assistants, or if you've got robot drones that could help you, all of these different crew members get to pick things that they're going to do in that event, whether it's batten down the hatches and try and keep people from, being too badly burned by exploding consoles, or if you're actually like, at the controls, maybe you're helping that guy out. There's even tasks that might be, I'm just helping this person. I'm terrible at it, but I'm there for moral support. These are things we wanted everybody to have something to do during each one of these events. And then depending on your success and failure of these individual events, you gather encounter successes for the whole Starship encounter. So rather than keeping track of every single damaging hit and every single point of damage and how many hit points does the Death Star have, you do have damage that your ship can take. There are different levels. Your artificial gravity can get blasted. You might lose a weapon. Everyone in the crew might take a bunch of radiation damage if there's a fusion leak. There's things that can happen, but it's less about an individual die roll per round as it is everybody at the table making a decision where they're going to be, what can they do. And because every player can only do one task per event, there's a lot more conversation. There might be an instance where the pilot goes, hey, co-pilot, take this because I'm way better at this thing. And suddenly this task, I need to do this. And so they might flip their tasks, and maybe the less than stellar pilots at the controls for one Starship event because the guy's over there, patching somebody up. And we wanted to create this environment of conversation, so everybody during a Starship combat or piloting out of an asteroid field or something, rather than just I made a couple of skill checks, it's more of a conversation and it's more of a narrative. Where that way everybody's involved. No one's just sitting there waiting to, did I die? Can I do something? And that's what we're hoping the end result is. And when it comes to the actual damage that starships take, I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at the Pacific Rim role-playing game yet, or Mechs in the Vault. We have a very similar system of system trauma, basically system damage, different levels to different areas of a ship. And the bigger the ship you are, the more areas that you have. Auxiliary craft have one level. Basically, they have one type of system and they can take 2 hits and then they're like, I gotta go. yeah, we wanted it to be just crunchy enough that everybody can feel like they're doing something, but not so crunchy that it becomes a min-max. Like, I must do everything. I have to be the one that does it. You can just sit back and try not to die.
As someone who has often played on either end of the games where I'm like, okay, now we're in a space combat, and I sit around and wait for a half hour for you guys to finish this up. Or the other side, I saw that your pilot class gives benefits to damage types that are common with it, so you can have the right weapon, and even if you're out of your ship, you could still participate. I was very excited when I saw that. I was like,
awesome.
I've had that issue multiple times.
Yeah.
And then a little bit ago, you mentioned Tyde. So if you want to play a psychic or force user, what is this Tyde?
So, spaceships collectively, space is often equated to an ocean, a sea of stars, the ocean between worlds, the endless blackness. It's got a lot of parallels to it. That kind of there's parts of space that are charted, the age of sail, but put it up to a space version. And when we started putting together Intergalactic Heroes, and one of the big differences between Intergalactic Heroes and its original origins in Rebel Moon is we were able to and actually kind of encouraged to now create a somewhat space fantasy magic element thing, that way if somebody did want to play a game that has that sort of backdrop to it, we wanted to be able to give them those tools. And so we did a very heavy, not nautical theme, but aquatic theme. It's called the Tyde. There are periods of high tide and low tide, basically depending on how much destiny is pushing and pulling on you. And at a base level, even if you're not a class that's really messing with it, that's using it to operate things, or uses your class doesn't use it, it still plays heavily into the inspiration system. That in Intergalactic Heroes, inspiration is far less of an option rule. In Everyday Heroes, it's kind of used as you can use it if you want to, you don't have to. In Intergalactic Heroes, it's tied into a lot of things. I just realized I made a pun. It's wrapped up in a lot of things. And in periods of high tide, which you roll at the beginning of every game session, is whether or not there's a swell, whether or not something has pulled the destiny out of the room, so to speak. And then in the written adventures that we plan on creating, there will be sections that will be like, hey, here's a particularly powerful moment. It is now high tide, or Alderaan just blew up. Low tide, everybody. It's there will be those instances in play, and the way it works is basically someone at the table publicly rolls a d8, and if it is a 1, it is low tide. Just sorry, low tide. And low tide means that you are not allowed to use inspiration to gain advantage. You can still use it for other purposes, but you can't use it to gain advantage anymore. If you roll equal to or less than the number of players at the table, or rather heroes in the group, it is an average everyday tide. It is normal inspiration rules, nothing special. If you roll higher than the number of players at the table, it is high tide, and everybody immediately gains inspiration, and regular rules apply. So it's a real quick thing you do at the beginning of every game session, or at particular moments during gameplay. You can kind of use that to almost set the tone a little bit. If they go into that corner of, I swear that's not Dagobah, and suddenly everyone feels like the crushing weight of the tide get pulled out of the room. They all now know, okay, whoa, something bad's about to happen, and anybody who might actually be a user of the tide or tidally focused, they may actually actually recognize that, and go, whoa, guys, something's not right. It allows us to add that mysticism, but with a small enough of a rules impact that if someone's like, I don't want the Force in my game, I want to do hard sci-fi, I don't want it, then don't use it, because it's not that important to anything that's not actually using that thing, other than some inspiration stuff. And that's completely up to you as a game master.
Now, one of the things you've mentioned before, Game Master's book, there's a player's book. When they did Everyday Heroes, Evil Genius Games just was like, one book has it all. Obviously, you mentioned Game Master's book is going to have some one-shot adventures. That's something we didn't have before. What else? What sets these apart, really?
Sets it apart from the Everyday Heroes core book?
From doing a single book, what made that decision? Like, it has to be done as two.
There's just a lot. There's just a whole lot of stuff. If you want to create it as we had to come up with a decision. Are we going to say that it is just powered by Everyday Heroes, and then we create a setting book that's got everything, and then we can just take the chunk rules out and go, nope, they can just use the Everyday Heroes rule book? Or do we realize that there's enough differences in skill descriptions and what your wealth can buy you and how many weapons, and oh my gosh, the weapons, we were like, no, it really kind of needs to be its own game. And that's when we started doing that page count and figuring out, okay, we've got Origins in there, we've got a spaceship section in there, we've got the Tyde, we've got a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in here. And it was looking like it was going to end up being, and even before talking about it, adding the adventures, it was going to be a book bigger than the original core book. And while that's a hefty tome, which is great. We love big books. There's nothing wrong with it. It does mean that it has to, especially at now today's rates, it has to carry a higher price tag. And while it's awesome for having a boutique book that's like, $75-$80, I grew up in the heyday of this industry becoming what it is. I still get occasionally sticker shock at books that I'm buying as resource elements and stuff, because I'm like, God, that's an awfully small book for $50. And then I go, dude, it's 2024, come on. And we wanted to be able to keep it reasonable, but then it also turned into a prioritizing of how often do we think this particular rule gets used on an everyday basis by every single person? Not as much. It's a game that's more of a game master mechanic than it is a player mechanic. Let's shove that over here. It's not necessary to play the game. We started kind of parceling things out, what was necessary and what wasn't, and it started turning into, obviously the necessary stuff, the player's guide is still a big book, but enough stuff got put off to the side that we're like, we need to do a game master's guide. And then we started realizing that could be a cool way to have rather than having a third book that's just filled with critters, let's do a critter section of the game master's guide, because that's going to be something that the game master is going to want to have on hand. Plus it lets us add things that aren't necessarily throne world. Like the main book has definitely a heavy throne world feel. We wanted to be able to maybe add some more stuff that in that galactic bestiary that maybe it has less of that kind of feel and more of a generic sci-fi villain, or here's that thing that if you look at it, that could come from Clendathu. We wanted to be able to have that be more of the, here's how to run a game if you want to make your own sandbox or just expand on ours. Here you go. And that's what ended up being the Game Master's Guide, which is still being written. Obviously, that one's not done. The Player's Guide is mostly done. It's just in playtest and tweaking, and now we got to start assembling, art assets and stuff, and see where the next chapter, no pun intended, leads. So
going down to that next chapter, Evil Genius has previously done crowdfunding. Is that the intent to do with this, or
we're hoping to? It has not been set in stone. Originally, I wanted to try and have it like ready to rock and roll. Let's do this, by like Gary Con. I want to be, telling people in March, go back us. Reality set in, and we put a little more time into testing it, tweaking a few of the systems that were not necessarily coming out the way exactly we wanted it to. And we also really want this book, this is our first core book since the first one. And we really want this to come out as a product to be as shiny and fun and wholly put together as it can be, which means that we might end up doing a crowdfund on it in order to kind of maybe spruce it up some, maybe add different and better art, or maybe a stretch goal could be add another species, maybe take one of those ones that we made for the Game Master's Guide and yank it over and throw it into the Player's Guide. There's things that we can do. Nothing is set in stone just yet. But I know I would like to make sure that it has as an initially powerful launch as it can, because while I know that the product speaks for itself, crowdfunding in this industry has really turned into a good way to get people's eyes on your product. Even if you don't break the bazillion-dollar mark, it's still a nice way for people to recognize, oh, hey, I didn't realize they were doing a sci-fi game. And just get eyes on product, get stores to pick it up. It's a nice marketing tool. Even if it doesn't break the bank, it's still good to let people know and show off kind of what you're doing in a way that hopefully will get people excited to do so.
And obviously, you said that there's things being restructured still. Do we have an idea for when either release or crowdfunding or any of that might be?
I would be doing you a misservice if I gave you a date. Okay. Only because I know what I would like, but I don't know whether or not that's realistic. Especially if we end up doing a crowdfund, because that could change how much has to go into the book. But like I said, the manuscript itself is effectively done. We just need to tweak and alter some things, throw in some examples of some of the systems that are a little more obtuse from what Everyday Heroes might do in that same situation. Kind of just write up some nice narrative examples and then start putting the book together is the goal. Definitely in 2025. There is absolutely no reason why it would not be out by next year. And I'm personally hoping by the first half of next year would be nice.
And so if people are interested in more information or maybe getting involved with playtest, where can they go for that?
Evil Genius we have our own Discord server. They can also go to any of our Facebook groups. We actually have a page dedicated to Intergalactic Heroes by Evil Genius Games on Facebook. Or if you just want to ask questions, I am pretty much an open book. Whether you hit me up on Facebook or which is at Bryan C.P. Steele with a Y and ends in an E. Or I just recently joined Bluesky as Bryan C.P. Steele. And every Friday I have a YouTube show, Tales from a Professional Nerd, where I think I've done a couple of episodes specifically on Intergalactic Heroes, but every Friday I get on and I pontificate about something gaming related. Spend a few minutes talking about my life and then just talk about game stuff for a while.
Yep, and I'll link down to that below. I have seen a couple of them that were focused on Intergalactic Heroes, so yes, there have been a couple of those. Okay. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you for sitting down and talking to me. I am looking forward to the game. I've loved Everyday Heroes. I'm looking forward to getting sci-fi stuff with it. I had an old D20 Modern campaign where I used both the sci-fi and the fantasy all into the one.
Okay.
And so I'm looking forward to seeing what I can revive with my gaming group once these are all out.
Have you seen our PDF only releases of the agency, the agency files?
I have not. No, I'm hoping maybe eventually, because I've seen some stuff with that. I don't do PDFs. I'm very, very much a solid book as how I use things.
I will make sure to get them to you because it was a way. It was a way for us to kind of dip our toes into the space waters, but stay in the realm of Everyday Heroes.
Okay.
And it will give you a good idea of some of the stuff that might be headed in the greater scheme of things. And thank you for having me. And when we get a little closer down the down the way, if you are amenable to it, I'll make sure that Dave has your name on the list of people to possibly maybe play with us online or something. I know that we're planning on trying to put together some fun online games to show people how it works. So
That'd be exciting.
we'll see if we can make it happen.
We'll see. Yep. Thank you very much. Bye.